Oh, thanks so much, Zoe. Yeah, I appreciate you welcoming everyone and setting up the Facebook Live. So, good morning. There's 43 of us in the meditation dome right now. So, I'm just looking through and seeing your faces and reading some of your names for those of you who have your cameras off, which is absolutely fine. It's fine to have your cameras off. And yeah, I'm just appreciating seeing all of you. So, I want to welcome everybody. It's very nice to see some friends here, some familiar faces. And it's also very nice to meet those of you who I've never met before. So, yeah, I'm appreciating all of you making the effort to be here. I was just telling Amargita before we let you all in from the waiting room that I'm not a morning person. So, it might take me a little while to get warmed up. You might be thinking, wow, Singhashri is moving at a speed that's a lot slower than I'm used to her being at. um, so yes, I was asked by Amargita if I'd be happy to hold a meditation space for the next 4 mornings at this time. And I can't remember whether I suggested Tonglen or whether that was something that was requested of me. Did you suggest it, Amargita? Yeah. Amargita and I were up at Akashavana last summer together, and we did a bit of Tonglen while we were there. It's been a practice that I've been personally very inspired by for a very long time. Pema Chodron was one of the first meditation books that I read. I can't remember which book. It might have been When Things Fall Apart. But she's written quite a bit around Tonglen. It's one of her favorite practices. And I remember being quite inspired by it very early on in my practice. And I was living in San Francisco at the time, and I used to walk around the city and just every being that I crossed paths with, I just do a little bit of Tonglen, just trying to imaginatively connect with them and their lives and how they might be struggling, and just wanting to be open to that, really, not wanting to cut off from anything or anyone. And I do find the practice is quite powerful in this way that it invites us to just counteract, really, that quite natural human tendency to want to protect, want to kind of not turn towards that which is painful or hard to be with. Yeah. And yet our very liberation depends on us actually being willing to have our heart broken. So being willing to actually let all those barriers drop away, let all the walls fall down, and really be with our own suffering and that of others. So I'll say a little bit about the shape of this morning, and then we'll do it in some way. Sometimes things unfold differently than how we imagine them, but this is what I'm imagining. So I'm going to say a little bit more about Tonglen by way of introducing the practice, and then I'm going to lead us in the first 2 stages this morning. We're going to slowly build up the practice over the next 4 mornings. And then at the end, if there's time, we'll have space for any comments or questions. So anything, it could be anything you noticed during the practice, or it could that you just want to share, want to offer up to the group in service of the collective learning that we're doing together. Or it may be that you've got a question, a clarifying question, and I'd be happy to answer at the end. Yeah. Okay. So just to say also a little bit about me, because sometimes it might help for those of you who don't know me to have a little bit of context. So my name is Singhashri, and I live in London. I've been in London for almost 4 years now. Before that, I was in Manchester for about 4 years, and before that, I was in San Francisco. And I have been working mostly in the world throughout my adult life. Only in the last few years have I turned more towards specifically working in the secular mindfulness field. And just recently, I've been putting more effort into being a full-time Dharma teacher. But the whole time I was living in San Francisco, I was working first with young people, and then at the higher education level, I was doing equity and diversity work with teams of administrators and students. And yeah, really have always been drawn towards wanting to support, trying to put my energy towards greater justice in our world, particularly around social justice, and also very interested in environmental justice, and trying to align my life with my values, which has a lot of tension to it, as I'm sure we all know. So yeah, I think that's probably why Tonglen's always been very interesting to me as a practice, because I think it's particularly supportive to those of us who are actively wanting to be kind of in the world, in the tension of where we hold, our ideals for how humanity, how we could be, our potential, and also just what's happening, which is often both within our own hearts and what we're witnessing in the world, can feel sometimes very, very far from the ideal. So in a way, I think my whole practice, if I was going to essentialize it down to one thing, it's holding that tension and trying to engage with it creatively rather than indulging in the drama of it. So I thought I'd start with this beautiful quote from Trungpa, a controversial figure who also said some good things. So we can actually, this is actually a really good tip for Tonglen practice, to bring to the practice and to our exploration of the practice a spirit of both and rather than either or. So anytime we come across a contradiction where we feel like we're about to polarize, we can just think, how can I bring a spirit of both and to this experience? The everyday practice is simply to develop a complete acceptance and openness to all situations and emotions, and to all people, experiencing everything totally without mental reservations and blockages, so that one never withdraws or centralizes onto oneself. This produces a tremendous energy, which usually is locked up in the process of mental evasion and a general running away from life experiences. The everyday practice, I'll just read it again because it's so beautiful and it packs quite a punch, I think. The everyday practice is simply to develop a complete acceptance and openness to all situations and emotions and to all people, experiencing everything totally without mental reservations and blockages, so that one never withdraws or centralizes onto oneself. This produces a tremendous energy, which usually is locked up in the process of mental evasion and a general running away from life experiences. So, so we spend a lot of energy sort of trying to protect and put ourselves and kind of our environment in a little box and kind of keep things that we don't like out. So the first invitation of this practice is in a way just to ask ourselves, like, can I just acknowledge that there is suffering, not in some kind of philosophical way, like out there in the world somewhere there's someone who's suffering, but more like right here, right now, this tender being that's manifesting in consciousness suffers. There is suffering, be that physical, emotional, psychological, and that we carry our suffering, we carry it with us. So yeah, just being able to acknowledge that. I keep putting my hand in my heart because for me, one of the things I often do in a moment of suffering is pause. Sometimes it takes me quite a long time to remember to do this, which is quite interesting. So I'll be doing the whole mental evasion and blockaging, and then it's like, oh, Singhashri, can you just stop and just acknowledge this moment? This moment is hard. This is hard. Particularly right now. This moment, let's talk about like this moment right now, this moment in as a global society, we're experiencing a collective trauma. Um, so yeah, this moment is a moment of suffering. So for me, one of the things I'll be doing actually over the next few days is linking the practice to the stages of the system of practice. So for me, this acknowledging a moment of suffering, really being willing to turn towards and feel into that pain, that tension, that narrowing, that contraction, that tightening, whatever words work for you. Connect with the stage of integration. So this first stage of actually stopping having a narrow view of ourselves and what we're capable of, and beginning to open to, actually, there's a lot going on. There's both grief and joy in life, and in this moment, there's something painful, and being willing to kind of fold that into the fullness of our experience in any moment. And one of the things that I find very powerful about doing that, and that we know from the teachings on the positive Nidana chain, is that first step. Again, it can be quite paradoxical, but that first step of just acknowledging and being willing to actually be with suffering is one of the conditions, the supportive conditions for faith to arise. I remember the first time I heard that, I was really shocked. Like, how is it possible that faith can arise from turning towards suffering? Wouldn't it be that we just become more despondent? But actually, there's something in us that wants to wake up. There's a liberative energy that's inherent. So as soon as we stop fighting what's actually going on, no matter how painful it is, that liberative energy becomes simultaneously expressed through faith. Like, oh, it is possible to be with this and not either completely drown in it or get totally overwhelmed or completely fall apart. Okay. So I just want to give us a little helpful scheme to work with in this process of coming into a more real relationship with suffering. So we could think of it in terms of 4 stages. So in a way, one thing, and this is like sort of a personal confession. Your way might be different. But I'm a very impatient person. So I tend to, or I have tended to in the past, I'm getting better at it, to want to kind of crowbar my experience open and find all the suffering and get it all out and worked out as quickly as possible. And that just like causes actually a lot more tension, and it's a habit. So to recognize, like, what habits are we bringing? It's not like we're this kind of neutral being that is going to have this really straightforward relationship with our suffering. When we turn towards it, it's going to bring up all of our stuff, or some of our stuff. So that's also quite interesting to notice in the turning towards, what's the dynamic, what emerges there. And in a way, Tonglen is a fantastic mirror for that, because it's saying, look, can you start to turn and then see how that is for you? And then we work creatively with how that is. So it's a slow, non-violent process. It has the flavor of going beyond habitual ways of being with our own experience and other people, which tend to be more about objectification and utilitarianism. So like, seeing things as other than oneself and out there, or viewing and relating to our own experience in the world and other people from a place of like what it can and can't do for us. So it's interesting to also think like, oh, okay, so suffering, like, am I relating to my suffering? Is it a bargain? Like, I'll be with you until you go away, and then I'll be awake and everything will be okay. Or is it a willingness to actually lean into that tension and be with it and attend to it for as long as is needed, which we don't, in a way we don't get to decide how long that takes. So the scheme is, I should probably come up with an acronym for this so it's easier to remember. But anyways, it's a work in progress. So the first step is just acknowledging. I think I've already said that, like just, okay, this is a moment of suffering. There's nothing I can do about that. It's here. It's here now. It's manifested. So just acknowledging that that's what's happening, and that is like opening the doorway into perhaps a new way of being with our experience. So acknowledging. The second is opening to. Yeah, so we might acknowledge it, but then it's too much. Yeah, so we have to do something else. And actually, just to say that's okay. So I also want to acknowledge that sometimes we can't necessarily be with our suffering in the way that we'd like to be. Maybe we're not resourced enough, or there's other things going on that are calling for our attention. We need to be present in a particular way with other people, with work, with other situations in our lives. So also be aware of the habit that wants to kind of like come in and judge us if we're not like able to do it the right way and what the right way is. So when the process I'm talking about isn't necessarily just in any moment. It could be across a whole like time period of practice that includes many, many meditations, engagements with other people, other things we're doing in our practice. And that there's an undulation there. We lean in a bit and then we lean out and do other things to take care of ourselves. So anyway, so acknowledging, opening to, being with. One of the ways that my teacher Rebecca describes suchness, she kind of describes it as withness, which sounds a lot like witness. So being willing to be with something in a very unconditional, non-solution oriented way. Being with. And finally, taking in. So acknowledging, opening to, being with, and taking in. Okay, so the stages of the practice. I'll say all four stages, and then again, as I said this morning, I'll lead us in just the first two. So just to say, there are lots of different ways to do Tonglen. You can follow the traditional stages of the Metta Bhavana, for example. But I personally, for some reason, I don't know why, I prefer to do it in 4 stages. But again, I'd encourage you to play around with it. So not worry so much about the structure. In a way, as long as you've got the spirit of the practice, it doesn't even have to be done in a formal meditation. It can just be something, it can be like a spirit we bring to our life in general and to our interactions with other people. So these 4 stages are my preference, but do, as you get more familiar with the practice, do play around with how you might do it. Yeah. So in the first stage, we are working to simply establish ourselves in open, warm, loving, non-judgmental awareness. So the whole practice takes place in this space of awareness and metta. So it's an awareness infused with love, with an unconditional, unconditional love. So you could say the whole practice happens in the heart center. Yeah, it happens where we vibrate with the rest of the world. You know, where we feel the world, where we feel ourselves in the world. So that, I mean, in a way, that's a practice in and of itself. You know, our traditional, within the traditional Triratna meditations, we have the just sitting practice. So this is synonymous with just sitting, just being completely, beginning to support in the whole of our being a complete openness to whatever arrives. So we're just establishing that space of complete, open, infinite, warm space. And sometimes this stage is referred to as flashing into openness, which I love. I love the language of flashing into openness, because it evokes this idea that well, it's not an idea, it's the truth, it's reality. So it reminds us of the reality that space is always available when we remember, and that we can flash into it. And we can get good at that. Um, I also like the word flash because it has a kind of superhero quality to it. Like, all right, everyone, we're going to flash into awareness now. So, so for you, it could be that there's like a place in nature that's very spacious. Like, I'm looking at Lisa. I know she's at Danakosha. That place is like there's so much space. You don't have to go very far to connect with the qualities of spaciousness and the element space. So it could be that you live somewhere where that's possible, or you're sat next to a window where you can look out and look at the sky, or there's a place that you love out in nature somewhere that supports this sense of spaciousness. Traditionally, bringing to mind the clear blue sky can support this idea of flashing into openness, into this infinite space where there's nothing to obstruct any movement. And also in this stage, if you'd like, particularly if you feel that you need extra resourcing, we can bring to mind a Buddha or a Bodhisattva or a historical figure or an ancestor or a superhero or an animal, any kind of being or energy that you particularly feel connected to, that you can draw on the energy of, and who can support you in the practice. So you could imagine that being is sat with you in this open space, supporting and holding the whole process with you. Okay, so that's the first stage of the practice. And then in the context of this open space, we begin to turn towards suffering in this way that I've been describing. And Tonglen traditionally translates as giving and taking. So in the practice, what we're beginning to do as we turn towards suffering and open to it is we begin to connect with this intention of beginning to take in the suffering. And traditionally this is done with the breath, but you don't have to do it that way. You could just imagine sometimes I like to imagine it's just kind of pouring through the pores of my skin, like permeating in, taking it into the heart center where we hold this open space of awareness. And then within that open space of awareness, where there is no egoic clinging or blocking, the suffering is free to release and dissolve. So then when we breathe out, or you could just imagine letting out qualities like relief, ease, liberation, softness. Or it could be that you breathe out something, a quality that feels useful in the moment. So for example, if I'm frustrated, I might breathe out patience. Like I'm giving myself patience, or I'm reminding myself that I need patience. So that's how it works. We start to begin to connect with the breathing, or with just this sense of undulation, and taking in the suffering and letting it out. And we do that first in the second stage after flashing into open awareness. We start with ourselves. So we're taking in, breathing in our own suffering in a way, acknowledging our own suffering. It could be that also somewhere in the body we can sense that suffering. There's a contraction or a resistance somewhere in the body that we can feel. So you could even imagine breathing into that space, really fully allowing yourself to feel it, and then breathing out whatever it is that you need in that moment. Or just maybe the breath going out on its own brings a sense of relief and ease. So a question I often get is, well, what if I can't transform the suffering? So I just want to let you off the hook. You don't have to do anything. It's all happening in the open space of awareness. So if we were going to say that we're doing anything in the practice, it's that we're just bringing, we're bearing witness to a process that's naturally happening anyways. So our consciousness is supporting that process, or bringing that process into being through intention. So I've said enough. I think we should practice. I think we should sit. And if you're confused about anything, just hold your questions and we can answer them at the end. You could put them in the chat if you're afraid you're going to lose them, and we'll address them at the end. But for now, we'll just give it a go. And it could be that by doing the practice, your question gets resolved. Yeah. I want to invite you to just check in now with your body and allow it to take any shape that it wants. And laying down is also fully appropriate. And you also don't need to have your camera on for this if you'd prefer to have your camera off. So we'll do the first two stages of Tonglen. So to begin with, let's just take 3 long, deep breaths together. Letting all the words fall away. You don't have to remember anything. And if you'd like, one of the benefits of being on Zoom is we're on mute, so you don't have to feel self-conscious. So if you'd like, feel free to make any noises that feel good to you as you breathe out. And to start, we'll connect first with the ground beneath us, the earth, holding the body in place through gravity. So just noticing any direct sensations you can feel where the body meets the cushions, the bed, the chair, the floor. Opening to these sensations and dwelling in them for a little while. Feeling supported by the stillness of the earth. And then if you're sitting up, aware of the whole of the upper body rising into space towards the sky. If you're laying down, aware of the whole of the front of the body open to space, stretching infinitely in all directions. Beginning to connect with the quality of spaciousness that's available through this opening. As you breathe in, aware of how the whole body naturally wants to expand into space. And as you breathe out, you can imagine any tensions or barriers, any ways you're holding back or bracing against space, just inviting them to dissolve or soften. You could even imagine spaciousness being breathed in through all the pores of the skin. Aware of space both within and without. So that whatever is happening right now in your experience, sensations, thoughts, emotions, can all be held within this wide open space of a loving, warm awareness. And if you find it helpful to imagine a clear blue sky, luminous, infinite, or a place, a particular place that you connect with that evokes spaciousness, feel free to bring any images or a felt sense of that to mind and to heart. Noticing how that feels when you do that. So in this open space of awareness, all of our sensations can arise and pass without any interference. So sounds coming and going, even with the eyes closed, visual sensations like light, color, shapes can just be there. Smells and tastes. And the whole rich tapestry of physical sensations in the body, energy, vibration, tingling, tightness, numbness, warmth, coolness. playing with allowing all of it to be as it is in this moment. As well as any thoughts or emotions, just like objects in the senses, passing through the mind, the heart. Like clouds in the sky, never obscuring anything really, just passing through. And if you want to imagine a Buddha or a Bodhisattva or any other beings, maybe an ancestor, historical figure, superhero, bringing them to mind, inviting them to be in this space with you, supporting you in the practice. So it may be that you've already started to connect with ways in which you're suffering just now. It could be that there's some unpleasant or painful sensations in the body, or some kind of emotional or mental suffering that you're aware of, either in this moment or just generally in your life. The invitation now is to begin to connect with that, bringing to mind your own suffering, feeling into it. You might enjoy and find it helpful to put a hand somewhere in the body that you may sense contraction or resistance, tightening. Just bringing a sense of gentle touch and contact to that experience. And then beginning to introduce the breathing, if that's helpful. Or you might just imagine, whatever way that works for you, this letting in, this taking in of what's here. What's already here. Just noticing how that is for you when you begin to do that. And in the open space of awareness, simply allowing that suffering to ease in any way, and breathing out relief. Breathing in, opening to being with, taking in, breathing out anything, any qualities that can support you right now to help ease that suffering. Soften. And noticing how that is when we do that. When we invite these qualities that can support an easing, even a dissolving, a liberation from freedom from the resistance. So you don't have to breathe it all in at once, maybe just taking it in baby steps, a little bit at a time. Letting it take as long as it takes. And if at any point you get overwhelmed or confused or frustrated, you can always come back to earth and space as elements and qualities that can resource us in the practice. The stillness of the earth and the spaciousness that spreads all around us. Resting back in these qualities, allowing them to support you in the practice. And then gently, as you feel ready, beginning again, acknowledging, opening to, being with, and taking in. And then breathing out, relief, release, ease, softening. Remembering to meet whatever we encounter in this exploration with as much kindness and compassion as possible just now. So I want to invite you to just drop any effort that you're making. Perhaps again taking a few deeper breaths here. Connecting again with the ground beneath you, the stillness there. And once again, flashing into that open space, stretching in all directions. A deep blue sky. And the spaciousness that's available here. You could even rest back a bit in the posture. You might want to put the hands palm up in the lap. Once again, allowing whatever is coming through, sensations, thoughts, emotions, simply to arise and pass away. In this open, clear, deeply sensitive space of awareness. And taking a bit of time to appreciate your efforts this morning. Perhaps trusting that simply showing up is enough, no matter what's happened here. And we'll end the practice with a dedication. So I want to invite you to bring to mind an individual or groups of individuals that are suffering just now. Dedicating the practice to the liberation of suffering for those that we're bringing to mind just now. May they find peace, ease, freedom. May they benefit from this practice. So please do feel free to move, stretch, rub, pat, wiggle, shake any parts of the body that are calling out for attention. If you've got pen and paper nearby, you might want to make a few notes about anything you notice there, if that fits your learning style, or you might just want to look out the window for a minute and just reflect a bit on what just happened. Or maybe just keep breathing into the belly, seeing what's there. Just as a way to help us to embed it a little bit so we don't lose anything there. We do have just a little bit of time left for questions, so feel free to drop questions in the chat box as well, and I'd be happy to try and address them. So the quote is from Chogyam Trungpa. I can actually write it in here to you all. So, any questions? So before we lose anyone, I just want to say, and do continue to feel free to drop questions in the chat, but while we're gathering them, I just want to say we will be building the practice up over the next 3 mornings. So there'll be less talking and more practice as we build it up, in case, I know I talked a lot this morning, but I'm hoping not to say as much in the next few mornings. Okay, great. So just looking at the questions here. Repeat the 4 aspects. Yes. So it's acknowledging. Yeah, so just, well, or you could actually, acknowledging and turning towards are basically the same thing. It's like, oh, there's something going on over there. My habit is to turn this way. So I'm going to actually counter the habit and turn towards this something going on over here that I habitually don't like and don't want to be with. So acknowledging, opening to. So acknowledging would be like, oh, there's a door over there. Let's see if I can find the handle. And then opening the door, yeah, opening to. And then being with whatever we find behind the door. And then taking in. So maybe the taking in is like inviting whatever's on the other side of that door to come in, yeah, come into this, our space with us, be with us. Okay, I'm just gonna keep working my way through the questions here. Example of how you do Tonglen in the day. Yeah, that's a really good question. Sorry, I'm just gonna reduce this so I can keep the chat open. Yeah, so for me, I mean, it's hard during lockdown because we're not coming into as many beings as we normally would. For me, I started doing it on the BART train, which is like the San Francisco equivalent of the tube. So I just noticed, you know, I'd be going to work and I just look around and everyone looked like really miserable. And this is in the days before mobile phones, so you couldn't even distract yourself. And everyone just looked really miserable. And I just remember like just thinking, oh, I could just breathe in the misery that I see around me right now and just breathe out a wish for people to have a good day and to be free from whatever it is that's making them feel so kind of down. So yeah, you could imaginatively, as you go about your day, on your own, like with your own suffering. So for me, like doing the washing up, I find deeply unsatisfactory as an activity in my life. So I use that as an opportunity to just like, okay, Singhashri, what right now is actually not satisfying? Oh, there's a contraction in my belly. What would happen if I just softened there? So we can also, for ourselves, it's just in daily life, notice if we're resisting something going on. Like, how is that? A lot of this work is actually just getting curious about how suffering manifests and what the habits are around how we are with it, and starting to undo that, because that's how we stay kind of all bound up and narrow. The quote, I don't know what the name of the quote is, but it's Chogyam Trungpa. And if you just actually Google the everyday practice and his name, you'll probably find it because it's a very popular quote. So someone's asked, is the difference between sitting in open awareness and Tonglen that we focus or invite suffering in particular rather than allowing whatever arises? Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah. So sitting in open awareness is a practice in and of itself. You could just do that. So just sitting. And then in that space of open awareness, suffering, in a way, suffering will naturally arise. So as things come into our awareness, there'll be some things that we like and some things that we don't like. Or maybe like a thought train comes in about something and we get lost in prapancha, and then there's something in that that's not satisfying. So we can just get curious about, in the open space, if something comes in that's not satisfying, with the intention of Tonglen, we do the kind of taking in and then giving out relief, and encouraging and inviting a dissolving of that suffering. Which is, in a way, Tonglen, this is why I say we're not doing anything, because in a way Tonglen is pointing to the truth that in the open space of awareness and love, there's no stickiness. Yeah, so there's no kind of egoic identity that's doing the activity of pushing or pulling, grasping at what we like and pushing away what we don't like. Now that's not actually what's happening, because our habits are playing out, but we just begin to notice that that pushing and pulling, and we begin to invite a dissolving of that. So just sitting has in the integrity of itself, and then Tonglen is like a specific intention we can bring to what might be happening in that space that we can become aware of, and bring an intentionality to. And then, of course, we can do that as we build up the practice. We'll be doing that, bringing to mind other people. First, an individual we know who's suffering, and then all beings everywhere. So I hope that answers your question, Trish. Yes, good, Jess. Being careful in the breathing out and dissolving, not to force or want it to go away. Yeah, it's okay. It's natural. Like we do. I mean, in a way, there's an integrity to that wanting to go away. Like I'm sure, well, I can only speak for myself, but part of why I came to practice was because I wanted my suffering to go away. Of course, it's very natural. But you're right. If there's a subtle kind of agenda in meeting the suffering, then in a way, like the suffering knows that. It's like it's onto us. Like, oh, you want me to go away. It's like a child who's having a tantrum, and it knows where we want it to stop, and so it gets louder. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's like we have to, rather than trying to not do that, just be aware if that dynamic is there, and then also holding that in awareness. Yeah. So it just keeps unfolding like that. We just keep bringing awareness to any way that we are selfing out of the experience. So the wanting it to go away is another version of making a self out of that experience. This isn't me. This isn't mine. This doesn't add up to my idea of who I am. Yes, it knows. Yeah. Yeah, good. Okay, so I'm happy to hang on after 8 o'clock if there's any other clarifying questions. And otherwise, it'd be good. I don't know, Zoe, if you're still there, if you could take folks off mute, then we can all say goodbye. So thank you for practicing today. Hope to see you again the next few mornings, and have a wonderful rest of your day, whatever you're up to, and go well.